Welcome, everybody. Who were not with us yesterday, we have two guests, Sebastian Primpke from the Alfred-Wegener-Institut and Win Cooper from the Captain Moore Institute, Research Institute. And they will give a lecture on some of the practical things that we will do with the different analysis that we're doing. And Win will start explaining a little bit about Open Specy.
All right, thank you very much. Let me make sure I'm, oh, there we go, okay. And I can make that small. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of the current state of spectroscopy and microplastics research, a new open source community that we're creating for spectroscopy and microplastics, and some of the future advancements that we'd like to make for integrating artificial intelligence in to advance spectroscopy at large. I'd like to thank really all of my collaborators, which could not have made this possible without them. But also I want to give a special shout out to the Helmholtz Information and Data Science Academy, who's funding me to be out here with Sebastian Primpke in Germany for 3 months to work on Open Specy, and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the United States, who's funding quite a bit of Open Specy's development right now too. So really, why does all of this matter? Why do we care about spectroscopy? This is a sample of microplastics from the ocean surface, and you can see there are many particles in there that look a lot like microplastics visibly, but there are also other particles which we can't be quite certain about. For example, that one maybe. And spectroscopy is a technique that allows us to identify the identity the material type of these particles so that we can be really certain about what we're seeing. And you can't manage what you can't measure, so we need to be really accurate with our measurements. We did a literature review a couple of years ago on the current techniques used for analyzing microplastics. And you can see here that we have different visual techniques, optical microscopy being the most common. And typically in microplastics research, you follow up optical microscopy with different chemical analysis techniques. And Raman and FTIR are currently the primary chemical analysis techniques being used for microplastics. But identification of plastic spectra is extremely challenging. So this is a figure from 3 different labs of the same material. And we see that the spectral ranges are not the same, the spectral quality is not the same, the spectral peaks don't look exactly identical. So this makes a really big challenge for us to be able to accurately identify microplastic spectra. And you have several different parameters which are really critical. So we did a review on creating reporting guidelines for microplastics, and really they're things that you need to keep track of when you're measuring microplastics. And you can see here, you know, there's over 10 different parameters that you need to keep track of if you want to reproduce your microplastic measurements. So this makes for a really complicated situation for people who are new to the field, just getting started, to be able to conduct the best science that they can. So we want to make that easier. And we have this humongous reproduction of effort that's happening in the field. So we also reviewed papers to try to identify how many of them were developing their own reference library. And we found that more than 50% of studies that we looked at were developing their own reference library from scratch. So they're developing their own techniques. So we'd like to harness that effort, make it more collective so that we can collaborate together and make really great reference libraries together that'll help us be more accurate for our spectral identification. And Open Specy is short for Open Spectroscopy. Open Specy is all about collaborating, sharing, processing, and identifying FTIR and Raman spectra. Currently, Open Specy has 100 active users. We have over 1,000 followers on Twitter, over 100K spectra being shared annually to the tool. And we have pretty sustainable funding for at least the next 5 years to keep the tool online. So we're in pretty good shape, and these stats, I had to update them. It's like doubled since the last time I gave this presentation a year ago. So this community is really rapidly growing. It's really exciting times. The tool currently is hosted at openspecy.org. I'll just like big picture talk about what the tool does. So you can upload data to the tool. There's an upload tab. You can look at your spectra, do some different adjustments to it. Then there's a pre-processing tab where you basically amplify the signal noise of the spectrum so that you can increase the spectral features so you have better identification. And then it goes through and does compares it against a reference library, and you can get the identity of your spectra on there. It's also open source, so there is a R package and open source code hosted on GitHub. I was going to give a little demo too. Let's see here. Escape. Cool. So this is the tool. I can just run through a spectrum real quick. Upload the spectrum here. It's just going to give us the same thing because that's when I uploaded earlier. When I upload the spectra, you can choose whether or not to share your data. So if you have this selected, all of your data that you're uploading to the tool automatically gets shared with the broader scientific community so that it can improve future developments on the tool. You can do intensity adjustments. It assumes that all your spectra is in absorbance mode. So if it's not in absorbance intensity units, then you have to translate it. And then there's some smoothing, baseline correction, range selection options that we can do. I could give you an example of what it looks like without baseline correction, for example. And really, our goal with this tool is to make it as accurate as possible using the default settings. So we want this to be a single stream pipeline where you upload your data and you get the right answer the vast majority of the time. We're definitely there right now, and we have some ideas for improving it. Here we can look at the different reference spectra, compare them to see how good that hit quality is. We can look at metadata associated with those spectra. So for example, this one has a ton of metadata associated with it. And we can use different matching modes. So we could look at just the peaks and be able to get multiple validation steps so that we can be really certain of what our identity is. So that's a little demo of the tool. I'll go back here. And I'll talk about some of the future stuff. So really, this is a new type of tool. This is the first open source spectroscopy tool that's widely being used today. It's the second open access one after siMPle software, which will be talked about next. And this gives us, this open source feature gives us a lot of flexibility for how we can develop the tool. So for example, like I said, when you upload data to the tool, it's being collected. We're also, because it's online, we can track how you're interacting with the tool, and we can use that to improve our tool as well. But there's a really big community need here. So like I said, when our goal right now is that you upload the data and you get the right answer the vast majority of the time, but it isn't going to be 100% of the time. You still need to kind of manipulate some of the functions so that you can get the correct answer every single time out of it. But we would like to see that those manipulations even less. We'd like you to not have to manipulate the spectra at all and to have a fully automated pipeline. What this pipeline looks like is basically you upload the spectra to the tool, an artificial intelligence algorithm identifies what it is, and you just download your data. And so this AI framework is really going to be powered off of these data that the community is sharing. We can use those in what's called semi-supervised machine learning, which is basically we don't need to know the identities of the spectra that are being uploaded. We can use that data to inform the development of our model without knowing their identity, because they tell us something about the variability that we can expect. We're really radical open source people, and so we've already shared our code that we're working on GitHub for that. And some of the kind of newer ideas that we're going to embed within this artificial intelligence algorithm is to augment the spectra that we have in the tool. What that is basically to add features to the spectra that are likely to happen in the real world, but maybe that we haven't seen. So for example, you could have more noise in the spectra. We're going to add noise to some of the spectra. You could have more baseline in the spectra. We're going to add baseline to it, and this will help us to train our model to be a lot more robust to these different kinds of conditions. And then we're also going to add hierarchical classification. So this is kind of a newer concept that many people are working on in the chemistry realm. You could have kind of nested tiers of classifying a spectrum. For example, it could be like inorganic chemicals, and then below that is sulfur compounds, and then below that is beta lactams. And similarly for plastic, you could have plastic, and then there's polyolefins, and then there's polyethylenes, and then there's even more specific classes of polyethylenes. And by taking advantage of this classification hierarchy, we can get more accurate classes, and we can just classify what we're really certain about and not go to more granular levels that we're not certain about. So that's kind of the goal with including this hierarchical aspects into our model. We need a huge village to make this happen. We're looking for collaborators who are coders, data sharers, beta testers, spectra cleaners, sponsors, you name it, we'd love to collaborate. So in summary, spectroscopy use is becoming the status quo for plastic pollution research. Open spectroscopy, Open Specy, is eliminating duplication of effort, improving the access to spectral analysis tools, removing the barriers to entry for new practitioners, and advancing spectroscopy techniques. Also, open data rules. So, I got the open data code in case anybody wants it. Always at the end of the presentations, I'm like, okay, that's cool, but where's the data? So there's my data. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it over to Sebastian now, or do we want to do questions in between? Or
first on,
okay,
on Open Specy, if there are.
Yeah.
We've been so much instructed, so we don't.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
One on this, if you have other combinations, we looked a little bit yesterday that we are using these silver filters, and we saw some background from that. That's the idea. If you give kind of backgrounds, you will, one way or another, incorporate that into your database.
Yeah. Backgrounds are really tricky to remove accurately from the spectral signatures, but definitely the idea with this really big database is that there will be some kind of background variation in the spectra, and that because we'll have that in our database, it'll be more robust. Yeah.
But you want to take this contamination out, or do you want to have spectra with contamination in that gives you the right answer?
Yeah, but both approaches will work. Both approaches will work, and I think when you have background, especially really high background, you may need to try to use both. Even you may need to try to figure out if you can create a spectral situation where, or a reference database where you have that, and then also try to remove it.
That happens automatically if we get match on a lousy spectra with a lot of background that will be uploaded in your database. So you will have a spectra which with a certain matching factor will be uploaded in your database.
Other thing, what maybe you only talking about trying to do one identification in the spectrum. What we often see in Raman is that you need to use to identify two materials at the same time. So this also would be, say, okay, I have material A, which is then the polyethylene on silver background B. So do you think about to implement something in the future as well as that? So you can choose either to be as good as possible or say, okay, test for two components.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good question. One thing I think in this paper they were doing this thing called blending, which is basically adding spectra to each other that you know. So like, let's say I know the filter, like what a silver filter spectrum looks like. Yep. And then I know what the polyethylene spectrum looks like, and you just add the two together, and then you get, if they're equal spectral intensities, then you would get what that spectrum looks like. And yeah, I'm interested in doing that. One of the things that I am currently trying to figure out, and maybe this is a question to everybody, is like which mixtures are appropriate. Because one thing I think about is like, should we just be mixing everything? Like, is there such a thing as like a polypropylene cellulose mixture? Like, does that make sense? Should we have that in our library, or is that going to like confuse people? Huh? What's that?
Biofilm.
Oh yeah. No, yeah, true. Yeah.
I think if you think about, if you think about that and you want to do it like an open source kind of everybody's just loading up things, community kind of thing, then this would happen automatically because people will upload lousy spectra with a lot of background,
Right.
And it goes to a limit where you will be able to say what the plastics is, or even in the future also you will be able to identify. So I don't think you will have to manually put in backgrounds. It might happen if you have if you have 100,000 spectra uploaded, there will be these 10 spectra which are lousy. You know that they still are these compounds, or you are these mixtures. I'm a little bit on the approach that you
have. Thanks. Yeah, that's good feedback.
And another thing which was not on your presentation, but we discussed yesterday, you were also interested in looking at pyrolysis kind of data. Is one of the things that you want to look in the future, or because that's very much disconnected from spectra.
Right.
Spectra, but
it's very much a new thing for me, and honestly, it's not my expertise. So I have some collaborators who are experts in pyrolysis GCMS, and they're interested in developing a similar community database and community tool. I think it would be very different from the current Open Specy interface, but likely a lot of the things that we've developed in Open Specy could be translated into analyzing pyrolysis GCMS data. So I think it'll probably take a year or two before that really gets off the ground, just based on my experience with how long it took to get Open Specy up and going. But that's definitely something we want to do. Yeah,
I think it's very much needed. I think, and we've been in touch with Frontier, who make the pyrolysis units for this work, and they are building up databases that we will need both for the plastics but also for additives. And we think, in theory, the technology would also be able to detect, say, if there's more than 20% of additives in the plastics, you will be able to pick up a signal, and that would be also. But there are things ongoing. I will meet hopefully the people from Frontiers in the beginning of next year in March. But let's maybe, because I think that's very much needed, but it's not come so far as you have come with the FTIR and the Raman spectra.
Yeah, but definitely an up-and-coming technique that I think we'll see getting used a lot more, especially once we figure out how to automate the analysis routines a little bit better. It could be really great to just throw your sample into a pyrolyzer and get the mass of all the plastics in it. That's the dream.
That's not really happening.
No, it's not. I know.
Particle sizes, and we.
Right.
The good thing is those can easily be combined. I think this is the advantage that we say, okay, we use the best method for getting particle sizes and then put the sample to the Peruses cap and do Peruses and getting the mass as well, because then we don't need to do this mass estimation stuff and get really reliable results.
I think, I think also if you you talk, and that's why we use silver filters, because we can fold them and put them into pyrolysis. So it is the idea that we can do both FTIR with scanning and using siMPle and Open Specy, and at the same time you run the pyrolysis on the same samples. And that's why we get a little bit lousier spectra of less quality, but it seems to work relatively well that we experienced this these last couple of days.
Yeah, it's the same why we decided to use anodisk, because we can crush them and put also to pyrolysis.
We maybe have to talk about it, because we have now Laura is not here, but we had some bad experience with the anodisk.
Okay.
I mean, wasn't it just to get, that's because you use material.
Yeah, oh sorry, Nina.
Yeah, but they're so brittle. I mean, just even putting on the glass filter top.
Do you use PP supported ones?
No.
Or yeah, we use obviously PP supported ones
Yeah.
because the other one doesn't work at all.
No,
Yeah,
I agree.
That's our experience.
I agree they are not suitable at all. That's why we decided to use PP supported ones, and they are well handleable. But then you just need to take care that you don't use it crushing the PP as well. But this works.
But then how do you remove polypropylene altogether from your samples in
Mm.
pyrolysis, or?
No, what we did and also published is that it was pushed out from the middle of the filter.
So
Ah.
the PP is around the edge, and then it was once you've done your FTIR. This is for a dumb person who doesn't really
Yeah.
understand anything. So then you've got that little bit around the edge, and then you poke it through,
Yeah,
basically,
because it's too brittle.
Mhm.
and then it just
Then
you,
we
so
use
you
it
just
again.
poke it through into the little
Yeah.
cappy thing that's needed for pyrolysis.
It was crushed and
But
it's
then
written in the
there-
paper.
the cup is so small, how do you?
Crushed it,
I think they.
or unless you use different
Transmitted.
size cups to what we
We need to check what we would need to
If you
check
can
the.
crush it, then you can just you can
Mm.
manipulate it in different ways,
Yes. but
because
then-
then it's a powder, so you
Which
can.
Yeah,
filter is it?
But then did you actually get
analytical
everything
and
in the little
bioanalytical
cup
chemistry
once you crush
with
it?
together
I
with
mean,
Bavel but yeah,
Probably.
the one about the German
If
bike.
you are careful,
it's
can't go
general.
anywhere.
I can share afterwards.
Yeah, I think I want
Hey.
I'm just curious to the actual
the method.
transferring of
Because
the crushed anodisk into the little pyrolysis cups, because I've used like tiny pyrolysis cups, weighed stuff in. and
What
it's-
kind of furnace do you have?
Sorry,
What kind of oven do you use for pyrolysis?
kind of
Oven.
oven.
Frontier one,
Is this a micro furnace or
I think it's a micro thing. It's these small.
Yeah.
Small things.
we can have a look at it.
Yeah, we can look at it. Because the anodisk spectra are of better quality, because you can do transmission on those.
They
That's the
have
reason.
the drawback that they are cut off earlier than the one on silver. They have pros and cons.
Okay.
But that's why we decided to go for another. We can use transmission, and we can use them for everything else. We even can do Raman on them.
Wow. Do you have the polypropylene signatures show up when you do transmission through the polypropylene supported ones? or-
Yes, for sure. But
Okay.
we use it then also internal standard to check if everything runs well.
Right.
So normally we see any issue with upcoming from the either from the instrument or from people handling the microscope directly in the signal of the PP at the corners of our image. And siMPle has a tool to cut that off. So you will see that.
But just getting back, and we looked at our spectra from the silver filters. They were not as bad as we thought. It
Yeah,
works
good.
relatively okay with the SiMPle software that you are going to explain now. This is a nice.
Yeah, you translate.
Systematic identification of microplastics in the environment, SiMPle. I'm presenting here on behalf of the group mentioned here. So it's me, Arisa Vianello, Gunnar Gertz, and Jens Wollertsen. And yes, and I mainly doing the programming, and we got also a lot of input from Arisa and Gunnar. The slides are not working. Now, So what are microplastics? Well, most of us in the room know what microplastics are. We have several definitions. I use one of the older ones, where it's defined from 5 millimeters down to 1 micron. And they are used in industry still. While they're a little bit banned, they try to reintroduce them labeled differently, like soluble polymers or in liquid form, because they did suspensions, or formed by weathering of larger items. For example, these nice fibers we have on Helgoland all the time, in our bird nest, or in our harbors, depending on the wind conditions. Microplastics are currently getting defined as polymer-containing materials with more than 1 weight percent. It's currently always in discussion, but this is one of the definitions. Quite important to analyze microplastics, on the one hand, is we need to report not only if it's a plastic particle, but also the chemical identity, especially for small sized particles. They can contain other chemicals like plasticizers, and this is important for risk assessment as they need particle numbers, shape, polymer type, especially to cover the different type of plasticizers used on the materials. If you look at the process for microplastic analysis, we have various compartments of which we extract the sample, then measure, in this case, hyperspectral spectroscopy, chemical imaging, and then often nowadays data analysis is one of the bottlenecks, like Win also showed, to get the concentration of microplastics. While each of these steps has its own challenges, one of the challenges for the data analysis is we often have large data sets, various chemical approaches, low number of open access data sets, so we cannot verify our own methods, and a lot of unharmonized data reporting if the data is reported at all. So it's something we Win also focus on, share your data. How can it be analyzed? We had this already a little bit discussed with FTIR spectroscopy for particle numbers and polymer types by reference databases or other chemometric approaches. FTIR goes down to 10 micron, depending on your system. Raman, using a different type of illumination technique, can go down to 1 micron, but often is more time consuming. If we want to have the polymer mass, we normally go for thermoanalytical methods, but we lose the sample afterwards. And the whole presentation afterwards will now concentrate on FTIR. In a nutshell, what is FTIR doing? We have the IR radiation, which is absorbed by a molecule by these different types of vibrations shown here, and these form a so-called fingerprint. So if you have then a spectrum shown below, put it through a spectral database using siMPle or Open Specy, you get an identification. For this example, it had been polyethylene. So most of the polymers have a really nice own fingerprint, so we can use that to identify them. Initial approach was to produce a check for these peak regions, but as developed, we moved even further on. So if you have now your sample, well, how to do? You can then also use siMPle. So if you want to have download siMPle, you find it here. This can then do the whole analytical process from spectral comparison for you. You can check also individual spectra, similar to Open Specy, but we do not have these many baseline correction tools and smoothing tools compared to Open Specy. We will have a few more in the next version, but not here. Our databases are available free of charge, and what is our what Open Specy currently cannot do is work with hyperspectral datasets. So you have now your particles selected, for example, by filter over filter meshes with funded micropore size. Normally we do an optical sorting of the particles, and in our lab we then directly go for RTR, FTIR. So placing these tiny particles on a 2 × 2 mm size of crystal, tremendous work, takes some time, but then we also get a spectra. For this example, using Opus in this case for data analysis. And you see it's nice spectra, but you also see it's not a pure spectra. There's some in the red signal around 1000 wave numbers, which is more related to a biofilm. Something we just discussed a moment ago. Second thing is, if you have a microscope, you can go for 2 pathways. You can manually select the particles on the filter, or do chemical imaging, and afterwards do a manual analysis or an automated analysis. So if you select particles in the substrate, here's an example. You either need to manually select them, or you have automated pathway to do this. Afterwards, each of the spectra has to be filled in into a data analysis. From here is one nice example. So we mark these particles like this nice sphere, add in our aperture of 20 micron, and then I analyze this for set. I ended up with 104 particles, of which 2 have been identified as plastics. So this polysulfone I showed before. And if I assess this now with imaging, you see that we're using transmission, we are using anodisk filters, and only measure on the concentrated area. And in our case, we have an FPA, then transfers the really broad view into a chemical image. So behind each pixel, like in your case as well, we have a spectrum and can select. So you know the situation, we end up with some of these spectral maps, and now have to decide where's our particles or our polymers. Doing manually this work takes ages and tires you out. So how do we design our data analysis? We spent a lot of time finding the best process in Opus, so the Bruker software, and then we said, okay, we need to do a correlation with the original spectrum and the first derivative. And only if both yield the same polymer hit or the same polymer type hit, we get a successful hit. And in the tested data set, we had an error value of 3%. Good thing is we can transform everything into images. So now we use siMPle to do the process, getting this raw image for us, and then do image analysis in Python with, using siMPle ITK, which is also used in medical science. So we reconstruct larger particles to avoid issues of bad spectra and stuff like that. So using the same area, now we did a chemical imaging with 2.7 micron resolution, and you see directly the advantage of the system. In a heat map in siMPle, you can quality check your data, see, okay, if nothing unexpected, I get a representation of the particles present, and the level of details, like these shapes from diatoms, is also represented. If I now do the analysis process, we found 10 plastic particles, so 5 times higher, of 4 different polymer types rather than 1. And in addition, got also information on 16 non-synthetic particles, which is for a treated sample not as valuable as, for example, a snow sample, where we can then have additional metadata or can try to figure out where the sample came from or what had been distributed. The good thing about siMPle is it's not limited to one IR system. So we are not limited to one manufacturer. Each is available free of charge, and we are currently imports from the direct data for Edgelint, Bruker, DS Daylight Solution, Perkin-Elmer, and Helmholtz Fisher scientific data. And if you then compare the outputs, you see in each case we get a chemical image representing different polymer types, including natural ones. In the upper case, you also see this PP we mentioned a moment ago in the discussion from UNODIS, which we move for data analysis. But this is always giving a good, you see here it's worked really well to say it's fully identified in that area. When we did the quality control, for all data sets, we found that we have reached at least 93% of correct assignments. So the Perkin-Elmer one has a whole high one, the Bruker and Edgelint ones as well. But the particle sizes depended on the number of particles, depended a little bit on the available pixel resolution or spatial resolution of your system. Now, we applied it, for example, on deep sea sediments, sampled rather close to each other. And there we found a larger difference in polymer composition, but also numbers. So even if you sample rather close to each other, you will not receive the same results. But it's also difficult to determine general trends. You see it for this A5. You have the lowest number there and also in rather high number. So it's really difficult to assess it, especially for survey designs. On the other hand, SiMPle is also used, not only in our lab. So we had one example where it was used for method validation, for sample treatment, or for citizen science projects, for harmonization of all the used spectrometers. What we experienced by using the SiMPle a lot, so you see here one example for wastewater treatment plants, which were investigated with FTIR, and the other half of the sample for a series also with porous GCMS. We found strange results. So we got a lot of small particles, but on the visual image, have seen larger ones on these places. So we spent a lot of time with quality control. So, this looks more or less good like a polymer, but we were sure that something is weird here. We had a good assignment with reference spectra, but we had a leaf-like structure, and typical peaks of biopolymers like from natural polyamides or polysaccharides were missing. So we had two explanations. On one hand, treatment plants use water-soluble polymers to improve particle removal, or some natural materials get not fully degraded during treatment, either in a plant or by us. So we assessed the spectra again. Lisa Roscher, in this case, investigated literature and found plant cuticles can form a really similar system, especially, for example, for tomatoes. It was also easy to reprocess, so we chose 3 different types of leaves, processed them with our enzymatic chemical digestion, and added to the database. We added acrylamides, which are used to the database, and also now aim to maybe improve the extraction process. But by adding cuticles, we now can reproduce all the structures. So what was unexpected, that they form really fine film-like particles or structures. So this was really interesting to see. Now we added also to the database. What it impact had on the results? You see major polymer types, rather than accurate and Warnish, were not that hard addressed, but especially this one was dramatically reduced, especially for the sample in February 2019, still all other polymers stayed more or less the same or were less affected. So I think this will make it a really good addition to databases. And SiMPle, we are currently improving our imports, going for batch analysis of single spectra, want to get our RV pipeline inside, so you don't need to use this external scripts anymore. And yeah, in general, want to improve the performance for calculation speed and so on. And now I come to the acknowledgement. So there are a lot of people to acknowledge where we contributed, especially our funding partners from the German Federal Ministry in Education for the FACTS project, and especially the European Horizon 2020. So the European Commission for the EUROqCHARM project. And now open for your questions.
Thank you. Any questions on the SiMPle software?
I got one.
Yes.
So this is one I think a lot about because I think there's probably more gremlins hiding in the data analysis besides cuticles.
A lot more, yeah.
Right? There's other things that we don't yet have included in our libraries that are going to throw off feature analysis, totally distort what we're seeing. How do we develop a system for flagging that in our tools so that we can be like, oh, this one's probably not in the database? Like what is that? What is that algorithm? What is that technique? I mean, because using the correlation coefficient alone, I mean, you were saying that it was a good match.
Yeah, but it was a good match at all.
Right.
People wouldn't have seen it. People wouldn't have seen the structures of the visual image.
Yeah.
So this is what it makes the decision something is off here. And I think this is something will get difficult to solve by pure computational science. But we would need a flag, so when this method decides something is off here, to give you a hint where to look, that you should check this part.
Yeah.
So that you really only get a selection of where you should check your data, and the other one is considered safe. Because otherwise we have a lot of remnants somewhere. The other one, which was recently published by Kodula-Witzig et al., was steroids. Same as pyrolysis, Raman FTIR, the same way. But what they used was this blue natural rubber glass, washed them with mildew, just filtered that onto a filter, and then found this identification of polyethylenes with all three methods. And they just figured it out because they thought, why do we have so much polyethylene in our sample? So they did the same way like we did, why we have so high numbers.
Right.
I think it kind of highlights that in terms of research for FTIR, we're still in the research, development, and exploration phase to try and, like, for any query that someone says, I'm not really sure about the spectra, rather than brushing it off and saying, oh, it's just this, it's just something silly. It's important for people who've got the time to kind of investigate further, if possible.
What we often see now is that people just trust the database and do not think about how often this material is used. You see this, especially I've seen this for using a system for thermo official. They just reproduce what the system was giving out. And then you say, this is a water-soluble polymer. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that needs to be like spoken about more. And I think it's something that like Rachel and Chiara, as an example, have been exploring our polymer, like going into more detail. And I go, just trust the database, trust the database. We don't have the time to explore it further. But actually, there is a lot of benefit and necessity behind taking a little bit of extra time, taking a step back and saying, nah, this doesn't work, this doesn't fit, and trying to see where these options go to.
We're developing a bit of a protocol to try and at least standardise internally the procedure for checking things that are ambiguous or unknown, just so that we're at least following the same steps when we do that. Because at the moment, it's not really, I mean, internationally as well, it's not really brought to a level where we like deal with those things in the same way. And I guess we all deal with those problems probably in quite different and creative ways. And Like the fact that you guys both have these two different, like siMPle and Hyperspectroscopy are examples of two different ways in which you have addressed the problems that you have seen with microplastic analysis with FTIR and other spectroscopic techniques back in the day, and you've had to like address that that problem with these solutions, and there are still other problems that exist as you're identifying. Now that we should probably coordinate dealing with that in a
If you look
more
at
openly available way.
if you look at the most used polymers, and these are some special cases in 95% or 99% of the cases, these are special cases to work on, and because there's a lot of other stuff that you could do, but yeah, there are other particles, or yeah, you can go deeper, and that's involving. But if you say on the most used particles, that you find, this is a special case, or this is often happening. What's your experience?
So depending on that we were not that wondering about acrylates in the beginning, because this is an example, because normally we would say, okay, this is not heavily used, but we have found it a lot, for example, in areas with a lot of ship traffic, because it's coming from the ships, especially in sediments. So this is something which we do not see in the production numbers by Plastic Europe, but know that it's used everywhere in the room as well. So we are sure that this is not an exotic one, but the numbers would be still too high, and we're somehow producing strange images. So we were not convinced fully by the images we produced by the other measurements, because it was not so well taking the optical image. The other thing that we sometimes have with not the highly produced ones, we have now identified the next one, which could be a little bit problematic. It's based on, again, steroids, but we figured out at the moment, especially for biota, it messes up with two of our polymer classes. So we are now going together with Win, addressing a database update where this will be covered as well. And yeah, we have this once because we really need to look at your process before you filter something on a silver filter or anodized filter, that we remove these residuals from KOH procedures. Will affect you in a similar manner.
Yeah, and then we also found a strange kind of thing yesterday. But say you guys are going to work together on things. Is this going to be a kind of integration with Open Specy and siMPle, or what are your ideas on?
Ideally, it could be some way siMPle can use or can add an interface to work together with Open Specy, but currently I think it's limited that we cannot get air into the system, but we can figure out a pathway to hand it over.
But that's the idea, because if you have a community which gets more and more spectra in and more information, that would be it. It will grow very big, and I don't know if that's practically going to work.
Yeah,
but in theory, that is a good idea.
It's a good idea, and initially we thought about when we met at the 6th IMDC when I met first. We also discussed it and said, okay, Open Specy would be able to do that. How simple is then, for example, doing all the routine data analysis stuff without, so you have a fixed database which you need to use in kind of validated environment. Where Open Specy is far more suitable for advancing and
yeah, and probably also a little bit how we use it. We do this routine thing now with the data that we need to produce relatively quickly, and then we have we matching some spectra that we are onshore on Open Specy, and that's now we do that a little bit independent from each other, but yeah, that's probably an integration. But the worry is that Open Specy will grow that big that the interface is more and more complex, because it will
Yeah, that could happen. That could happen, but this is a thing we need to keep in mind, because when you add more and more to the databases, will affect the overall performance.
Yeah, we are thinking about that for this 3-month project that we're working on right now too. How can we harmonize and consolidate just the information we need out of thousands of examples of polyethylene, for example? Like, what information do you need from that so that you can improve your identification? I can tell you right now, it's not all 1,000 spectra. Maybe you need quantile spectra from that distribution, maybe just 10 of them. You know, you need like kind of an upper bound, lower bound, middle bound. Maybe you need just like some of the peak kind of characters out of all of them. So we're exploring that currently. And, I guess how I see the synergy with Open Specy and siMPle is that Open Specy is an online tool which allows data sharing to be really easy, because you have to be online to use the tool. And so we can like communicate back and forth between researchers on that really easily. But the main limitation there is that because it's online, it's really computationally expensive for us to do any big processes. That's why we don't have focal plane array or hyperspectral imaging yet, because it would cost too much money to run those kind of operations online. But siMPle is already doing that really well, so I don't really spend a lot of my time kind of worrying about that. We're trying to develop it out just a little bit, but I think until that like major barrier is solved, we won't be able to move something like siMPle fully online. And you'll want to have kind of these like multiple tools for different situations.
I would just, because I always think from my like applied side of things, how necessary is it for us to have to go into so much detail on the polymers? Like there's always I guess it will depend on the person that is generating the data, because in some instances, just confirming that what you're looking at is plastic would be good enough. Or with monitoring, we have to follow the top grouped polymers stuff. But do you think there's going to be a way in which it's going to be easily accessible, so people that need to do the simple things can do the simple things? In terms of simple, not the program, but the basic, like this is just a plastic or this is not a plastic. And on the other end, these people that can then go into further and more detail.
But from a chemist side, if you say it's plastic, and I say, for source tracking, I need to know or to assess the quality of the environment. I need to know the polymer type. If it's plastic, because this can come from everywhere and we use it also. But if you say it's plastic process type, you can start a source tracking. If was a wastewater treatment plant, was it a local input from somewhere or something like that, especially in industrial or urban environments. So this is, I think, what the regulator wants.
Yeah.
I thought also that we only need to focus on a few polymers and that's it. I think we need more complex information, and also user patterns are shifting. There will be plastics which maybe are going to be restricted use, and then there will be new polymers showing up. We talked a little bit yesterday about these fluor-based polymers, which are coming. There are some rumors about nanoplastics in these 3D printing applications. So there are applications that are coming up which maybe are, as a point source, a bigger problem than the whole polyethylene, polypropylene kind of uses. But it's an interesting chat. Well, I think we have some work for us in the next couple of years. So how do you work? Okay.
Yeah.
I would like to thank you.